Welcome back, everybody. This is Bio here for another exciting episode of Sun Chasing Success. And this time I've got a very intellectual brother. He's an author. His name is Clarke Illmatical. He's a writer and director from New York City. He's been writing for a long time. His writing's been featured in the Amsterdam News, the Norwood News, the Brooklyn Eagle, Harlem Community News, Queens Community Politics, The Final Call, Baltimore African American, South China Morning Post, and China Global Daily. He's also been in Time Out Hong Kong, the Phnom Penh Post, and China Cities. His new book is called The Black Man's Travel Guide, Homeboy and the Pyramids. And basically, Clarke is going to talk with us a little bit today about his experience, his life traveling to many different countries, and this new book he's writing, Homeboy and the Pyramids, and what that means for all of us who are chasing the sun and looking for that success and fulfillment that we all long for. Welcome to the show, Clarke.
Thank you, man. I think I need to hire you to do the introduction for me for the rest of my life because you make me sound a lot better.
Hey, man, you're a great man. You're a great man. So we just want to pay homage to that and highlight the best that you've shown us.
Well, Bio, I appreciate this platform that you're giving me. And also I wanted to just start a dialogue with other men, specifically so-called, that I mentioned, so-called black men in the introduction of the book, because there are a lot of brothers who are doing amazing things, traveling. And, years ago, I think there was a magazine called like Maxim, and I read about a brother who was like taking his balloon, traveling via balloon around the world and hot air balloon. I mean, there's brothers who are doing amazing things, but the bottom line was I wanted to begin the conversation for quote unquote black men, a travel based on my experience that I've had living in several countries, and not just tourism, but living in a different country, and then also start that dialogue because the quote unquote black travel market is expected to explode. Now, of course, things have slowed down a bit with COVID, but they're expecting this market to reach billions of dollars. And these are people who are black travelers. So I wanted to have a separate dialogue for quote unquote black men, because I think it's necessary that we have this conversation amongst ourselves.
Well, it's awesome to have you here, man. And, just having for everybody to know, my first contact with you was, I think you were in Brazil at the time, in Rio. And I was looking at some videos online, just doing my own research. And I think, I just saw you there in a room, just telling so many things and advice for people. And it's been that way since. You've been continuing your YouTube channel, sharing stuff. Basically, give us a little bit of a background, first of all, so we can build that context for people, how you started traveling. And because I didn't really know you before that, and I think it's good for people to understand that. Like when sure. your upbringing, your education, how you got into writing and travel.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. So I started I'm born and raised in Queens, New York, middle class neighborhood, Jamaica, New York. And, I grew up went to the high school, inner city high school. But after high school, I was given the opportunity to go stay with a relative in Atlanta, and I was in Atlanta from 96 to 99. And so that was my first real travel experience. Because
even in the U.S.
Even within the U.S. And I talk about this in the book. There's a lot of brothers who may read the book and they have like felony charges or whatever, and maybe they can't travel outside the United States. You can get interesting experience traveling within the United States. And I highlight that, and that's important. But what happened was, I started out in IT after high school and everything. I went to a trade school, and in Atlanta, and I was in Atlanta, and I talk about this in the book, how great Atlanta was. It was an amazing experience, and the economy was very, very good there. And but when I came back to New York, still there was no travel. I had no interest in travel at all, really. But while I was working in Atlanta, I never forget one of the guys I went to trade school with. I won't say his name, he had sent some photos back about his experiences in Brazil.
Mm.
And it was like, I had my little girlfriend at Spelman or whatever. I really wasn't interested in going to Brazil for that. So I was like, all right, that's not really important to me. Later on, when I came back to New York City, I still in the IT field. I was working with some Asian guys, and I mentioned this in the book, and they kept on talking about Thailand.
Mm.
And I was like on the fence with it. I was like, that's not really my thing. I'm not really interested in traveling, because I was like a really super computer nerd, man. I was
Okay.
really hardcore, really a hardcore nerd. And then the other part was, man, I was super religious, man. My parents raised me with Jehovah's Witness. So it's
Okay.
like, it's like you've got this spiritual burden, and then you've got like this, I guess a burden to succeed in in my
Very
career.
very
So
introverted field.
super intro. I mean, like I would go
Yeah.
and hang out with friends on the weekend. We would, I
Yeah.
was a wild guy, despite quote unquote being affiliated with that religion, but I really wasn't living the kind of life that I should have been living,
Mm-hmm.
and fulfilling life. It was I never forget. So I stayed in the I field, and then I mentioned this in the book how I moved out to New Jersey for a little bit after New York after 9/11, and the same guy who was saying one of these Asian guys, he really influenced me. He left the IT field, and I was blown away because I never thought this guy would be able to leave the IT field. And he left, and that was the first time I got encouraged. But it was when I saw City of God in
Mm. Mm-hmm.
2003. I had never been overwhelmed by music and cinema that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I really want to go to Brazil. I saw City of God, and it's like, wow, man. But let me backtrack. Even before City of
Yeah.
God,
Let's.
another movie that really inspired me, that kind of planted the seeds, was the movie called the Beach,
Okay. I don't know if I've seen that
and
one.
that's Leonardo DiCaprio,
Okay.
and that's that one of his films, but it's based on a book.
Mm-hmm.
And this book was like an underground book. It was primarily, I don't want to say it was primarily, it was like back in the 90s, there was no internet. So
Mm-hmm.
early
Starting,
90s,
yeah,
early
yeah. Early
90s.
90s, there wasn't. No, I remember like
Uh,
96, 97, 98, the actual.
or it wasn't as ubiquitous as it
Right.
is
Some
now. So
people
it's
had
basically
it
like
as early as that, but
some right, but around mid 90s,
yeah, for the
mid
rest of the population.
90s, mid 90s, early 90s, there wasn't, maybe somebody would have an AOL account, but this book was being passed around, and it sent a lot of people to Thailand, and that was what really set the foundation for that movie.
Mm.
And after that
Okay.
movie, their tourism market exploded.
Wow.
But
Okay.
I just highlight that. So I came from a place where, all of my 20s, I was, really introverted, like you said, a computer nerd, but at the same time, there was this religious baggage. And then, so the thought of me in 2003, when I said I wanted to go to Brazil, I had no idea how I was going to get there. And
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't manifest that until 7 years later in 2010. But I had to make a lot of changes. And so
Mm.
I had to become a different person. Yeah.
So the thought of even going overseas anywhere started you on a thought process and a problem solving process that
Right.
made you develop and change who you were. Like, for example, I got to get a passport. I might have to get a visa. In order to get this, I need the money to do this. And how much, like, what were some of those steps that shifted in you
Well,
internally and
even
externally?
well, it was funny, like around 2003, when I was staying, I remember where I was in New Jersey. I was staying in a place called Boundbrook. One of my buddies, who's kind of like a mentor to me, he had just came back from Brazil. It was something like, I saw this movie, and then like a few weeks later, he comes back from Brazil, and he's talking about the women. He's like, they're hot or whatever. And I was like, all right, that's what's up. But I had no idea how I was gonna do that. Like, okay, so I guess I'll just go there for 2 weeks, but I didn't want that kind of an experience. It was kind of like,
Right.
I really, really was overwhelmed by that culture. Like I never knew
Yeah,
prior to that. I never knew there were any African people living in Brazil.
yeah. That's one of the biggest draws for me, because when I grew up watching soccer, and Pele, one of their heroes, an African soccer player, that was one of the greatest soccer players ever in the world. So
Right.
my dad was African, and I was playing soccer. So Brazil was always there for me. And I know it's different for a lot of people, the experience. And then later I was introduced to capoeira when I was about 18. I had like phases, like every 4 years. Like when I was 8, it was like Pele and the Brazilian soccer hero. Then it was like the World Cup. Then it was capoeira. Then it was like the culture and the beaches and music and living in New York. So